Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ron Halber, and I'm the CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington. I'm grateful to have Governor Larry Hogan with us here today. The JCRC represents the public affairs and community relations priorities and the values of our Jewish community, representing over 100 Jewish constituent organizations in suburban Maryland, DC, and the District of Columbia. And today's virtual town hall with Governor Hogan and next week's with County Executive Angela Alsobrooks are being held to educate Jewish voters about the open Senate seat in Maryland. Please note, JCRC is an independent 501c3 organization and does not rate or endorse candidates for office. We work with elected officials at all levels of government to represent Jewish values and to advocate for our funding and policy priorities. The questions that I'll be asking the governor today, again, thank you, Governor, for being so generous with your time, have been developed by those submitted in advance by our audience. And as you know, the governor really doesn't need an introduction. He served his 2 terms as governor of our state and was the only second Republican candidate to do so in the history of our state. So, Governor, thank you for joining us today. And I wanted you to open today by maybe taking 5 minutes to talk about why you're running for this seat.
Well, Ron, thank you. Thank you very much for having me once again with JCRC. As you know, I actually launched my campaign by speaking with your group because my support for Israel and the Jewish community was going to be front and center in this campaign and what I focused on. I made the final decision to get into this race for governor, not because I was looking for a job or needed a title, but because I was so frustrated with what was going on in our country with the divisive, toxic politics on both sides, with people not ever getting anything done and not focusing on the things that were important. And I thought that just down the road from Washington in Annapolis, we got a heck of a lot of things done in a bipartisan, common sense way. And I think that's what was lacking in Washington. But the final decision came just a couple of days before the filing deadline when I saw a bipartisan deal in the Senate to provide funding for Israel and Ukraine and to secure the border. And it fell apart because people were told to vote against it, even though they supported all of those things. And that kind of made me frustrated enough to get in the race. I came to speak to JCRC to talk about my long, decade-long relationship with the Jewish community and with the state of Israel. We had a successful trade mission there when I first became governor. We already had good relations with Israel, but they became even stronger. And after October 7th, I just went to 3 or 4 memorials, and everybody was, remembering the horrific tragedy that took place on October 7th with people, killed and kidnapped and tortured and raped. And, it's something we should never forget, the fact that the memory of those lives lost and their families and the hostages that are still there. But it goes back to last October when Harvard was not doing anything to stand up to Jewish students. I resigned from 2 fellowships at Harvard. I had one in the School of Public Health about our nation-leading COVID response, and I had one in the Kennedy School of Government about how we fix the toxic politics and bring the country together. And I walked away from them because Harvard would not stand up to protect those Jewish students. And when people were talking about death to the Jews and death to Israel, I thought it was a time for people to stand up. And October 7th was a time for choosing. I chose to be the strongest advocate for Israel and for the Jewish community and standing up to antisemitism, which makes me different than my opponent. My opponent has called for an immediate ceasefire. My opponent is very much in line with Senator Chris Van Hollen, and I've said I want to be more like Ben Cardin and be a champion for Israel. So I appreciate this opportunity to be here with you today and to answer questions on whatever topics you want to talk about. But I'll just end my opening remarks with saying that this is not about the right versus the left. It's about the difference between right and wrong. And it's not just your typical fight between Republicans and Democrats. It's more important than that. This is a fight for America's future, and that's a fight worth fighting. And I think right now, standing with our strongest ally, Israel, is of critical importance. And we can't have people that equivocate or try to, make both sides happy. This is one where you have to decide, and my position is pretty clear.
Governor Hogan, thank you. I want to follow up on something you just mentioned about the about the divisive politics in America. Why do you think that you would be a productive or a positive force in helping to lower the temperature at the federal level?
Well, I think just down, it's what my entire career has been about. It was what I ran on in 2014 when I pulled off the biggest surprise upset in America. It's what I focused on in my inaugural address when I was first sworn in as governor and when I was sworn in the second time as governor. Both times, in the whole 8 years that I was governor, just down the road from Washington, I worked with a 70% Democratic legislature in both houses, and we came together I was the only governor in America to get a Democratic legislature to cut taxes, and we did it 8 years in a row by $4.7 billion. We cut the cost of healthcare by 30% with an innovative, the first state to do that. We passed criminal justice reform. We got a heck of a lot done, and we showed a better path forward. They don't do anything or get anything accomplished in Washington, and Democrats will only do what the Democratic leadership tells them. Republicans do the same thing. This has been my primary focus. I mean, I wrote a book 6 years ago or 7 years ago about how we overcome the toxic politics in America. I started an organization 6 years ago called An America United, solely focused to this. I've been around the country speaking about this at college campuses and at other forums. And, I've got a proven track record on it. I was also with Joe Lieberman, uh, sad to lose Joe Lieberman, who was a dear friend. But I was co-chairman with him of a group called No Labels for 3.5 years, which was also about finding common ground for the common good and how do we get Democrats and Republicans to work together. And one of the only bipartisan accomplishments recently was the bipartisan infrastructure deal, which I was very much involved in and had a lot to do with that getting done by bringing together. It was started as my chair's initiative at the National Governors Association, and we got all of that included in the bill. I brought together Democratic and Republican governors, senators, and congressmen, and hammered out a compromise which got passed. And so I think it can be done. Sometimes it only takes one person that's willing to stand up and be a voice. And sadly, we're losing some of those types of voices out of the Senate. And I think it's exactly what's missing.
You think that's a role you could play in the Senate?
I think there's no one else in America that could be better to fill that role. And I've got a proven track record of being that kind of person.
Thank you, Governor. Topic that's on everybody's mind, anti-Semitism. We've all heard the statistic. Jews constitute about 2% of America's population, yet 2/3 of the hate crimes are directed against Jews and their institutions. And I'm sad to report Maryland ranks 7th in the nation in anti-Semitic incidents. What can you do as senator to help, if you were to become senator, to help fight this scourge?
Well, it's something I've been talking about even prior to October 7th, and I've been talking about it for several years now. And I just can't believe that we've reached this point in America where we have so much hatred and anti-Semitism. You see, I've got my blue square here. Robert Kraft and the Rails brothers have put together a couple $100 million to fight anti-Semitism, and they're rooting out and finding where it's coming from, and a lot of it is you can see where from around the world it comes, and there's some bad actors that are infiltrating social media and sending messages that are helping throw fuel on the fire, making it even worse. But I said when I was first elected governor that hate and anti-Semitism have no place in our state. And we fought against that for the entire 8 years. It's obviously anti-Semitism is up 400%, which is outrageous, and that's why I continue to speak out. I will do that in the Senate. I told you I resigned from my Harvard fellowships last October because of the hate speech and the anti-Semitism. When we had issues before over the 8 years, we put money into every single project that every single Jewish organization asked for, including funding to secure synagogues and community centers and Jewish day schools. We'll continue to stand up and speak out as I have for the past 10 years.
Governor, you went ahead and opened your remarks a little bit about talking about the U.S.-Israel relationship. I know you're against conditioning aid to Israel. You said that. What right now, if you were a senator, what would be your current positioning and attitudes towards Israel in the middle of this conflict?
Well, I think we need to be unequivocal in our support of Israel. And I actually was calling on Congress to get back to work. They're all on recess. They're all out campaigning. And I said they need to get back to Washington and pass a bill so we can get the aid that Israel needs to protect themselves. And I want to do whatever I possibly can in the Senate to speak out and be a champion to try to convince the isolationists in both parties, which there are people that don't think it's that important to help Israel or to help Ukraine. And I happen to believe that it's absolutely critically important to stand up for our allies and to stand up to our enemies. And I think we need to do whatever we can to support Israel's right to exist as the only Jewish state and to defend themselves from from these terrorist organizations that are surrounding them and doing everything they can to try to wipe Israel from the map. And U.S. needs to stand with them.
Thank you, Governor. Let's turn to some domestic issues. Many experts believe that the prohibitive trust of childcare is actually inhibiting economic resurgence. How would you work to make childcare more affordable and accessible to Maryland's families?
Yeah, well, we have to pass the child tax credit for one thing to help ease the burden for struggling families. But there's no question this is a huge issue, and it fits into a larger issue of affordability and inflation and the cost of everything going up. It's doubly difficult not just to get people back in the workplace, but to take care of. We have a lot of sandwich generations where people are actually taking care of their kids and their parents, and everything is more expensive, and groceries are more expensive, and energy is more expensive, and housing is more expensive. And so we have an affordability plan in general, but I also have said I'm going to strongly support and push for the child tax credits. And we've got to get inflation under control and got to figure out a way to do something in a bipartisan way about the federal debt, which is causing all of this inflation and interest rate rise.
So you mentioned mentioned a second ago about the economy in general and high costs and services and inflation. Inflation has been stabilizing, has been getting better. And so what steps do you think, what areas, what services or deliveries do you hear when you're on the campaign trail? Do you hear the most people talking about the high expenses of what it's most difficult to afford? What are you hearing
Yeah,
people?
well, this is an issue I'm really passionate about. It's kind of why I ran for governor, actually, and it's what I focused my whole career on. Maryland had raised taxes 43 times in a row. We lost 10,000 businesses and 100,000 jobs. And I talk to seniors every day who said, I don't want to leave my kids and grandkids, but I can't afford to stay here in Maryland. And so that's what we focused on. We cut taxes on earned income tax credit for the lowest of incomes. We cut taxes on the middle class. We finally passed the Retirement Tax Elimination Act after 8 years of trying, so that people won't have to pay taxes on the retirement. It's being phased in. We're in year 2 now over a 5-year plan where we lowered the tolls for the first time in 50 years, which was a very regressive tax. We cut 350 fees, and we were unabashedly pro-business and grew the economy and took it from 49th out of 50 spots to number 6, the biggest economic turnaround in the country, and that really helped people. But people say, and if you look at numbers, oh, inflation is under control. But when I'm out on the trail talking to a single mom or a retiree on a fixed income or a family that's trying, or young people that are trying to buy a house, they don't feel that. They feel as if they're working harder and in some cases making more money, but it doesn't go as far and you can't afford. So the cost of groceries, the cost of housing, and the cost of almost everything, and it all adds up. And I just hear people saying, there's more month left at the end of the paycheck. And there's we have a single mom nurse, 3 kids, and she said, I went back to school and I got my higher designation and I got a raise and I'm doing better than ever, but I can't afford to put food on the table for the kids, and the cost of healthcare is too much, cost of prescriptions, the housing prices going up, and I feel like I'm slipping backwards. I mean, that's the kind of thing I hear.
So you're hearing mostly economic issues, economic.
Well, there are 3 main things that
What are
I
the
hear.
three main issues that you do hear on the trail?
Yeah, the 3 main issues. It's the economy by far is the number 1 issue. Number
Mhm.
2 is crime, because we've got, rising violent crime in places like Prince George's County and Montgomery County, and carjackings and robberies. And, in Prince George's County, murders are up 100%, carjackings are up 500%. people are concerned about being safe in their own communities. I talk to people in Montgomery County who feel the same thing. Some of it's coming over from Washington, D.C., and they're seeing crimes that they didn't used to see. So crime, and it's another one of my focuses. When the crazy defund the police movement came out, I was the first in the country to speak out against it, and I pushed a refund the police initiative, which put another $500 million, a 50% increase in state aid to local police. I think we need to stand up for our police officers who are putting their lives on the line every day to keep the rest of us safe. I received the unanimous endorsement of the state Fraternal Order of Police and every other law enforcement organization in the state, and we're going to continue to support them. The third issue that we also hear about is the securing the border and fixing the broken immigration system. And that you have to do both. You have to secure the border and figure out a way to fix this mess, because it used to be you only hear this in the border states. And here in Maryland, we border Washington, D.C. We're nowhere near the southern border, but it's impacting us and every other state and major city in America. And so finding a way to, I think this is the next bipartisan deal that has to get done in Washington, like we did on infrastructure, where we have to get people to stop using it as a political issue and blaming each other, and we have to sit down together and come up with a solution that starts with securing the border, and there are a lot of ways to do that, and then finding a way to fix the broken immigration system, because we have people that we really want to welcome, and we really need the jobs, and people that we can't get in. They can't, there's no legal way. People are graduating from MIT with advanced degrees, and they're smart scientists or engineers, and they have to leave. And yet we got people who are dealing fentanyl and human trafficking that we're welcoming in with open arms. So it just doesn't make any sense, and we've got to fix it.
Let me pick up on two of those issues that you mentioned. You talked about crime. Let me focus on gun violence, which is the leading cause of death in America among children, which is an extraordinary statistic to think about.
Yeah.
What do we do about it, Governor?
Well, there's no easy answer, but we've definitely got to go after it. So I've long been a proponent of common sense gun regulation to try to keep guns out of the hands of the mentally ill and out of the hands of criminals. And I support a universal background check, and I support an assault weapons ban. And while I was governor, I signed a red flag law. I signed a bump stock law. And school shooting, we had a school shooting in Great Mills High School in St. Mary's County, and we had a armed school resource officer that stopped the shooter after one child was killed. And then I then passed the Safe to Learn Act. I pushed through the legislature that required school resource officers and more funding for security in schools in every single high school in the state. And that's another difference. And my opponent is pulling security out of the schools, but I think it's important to keep our kids safe. And I've said I will push that same bill at the federal level to try to provide the support we need to make sure that we keep our kids safe. And look, Maryland has the toughest gun laws in America, but it has not stopped all of the shootings in places like Baltimore City and Prince George's County, and sometimes in Montgomery County and other places. Because criminals don't follow those laws. We've got to find a way to get the illegal guns off the streets, and we have to punish and provide accountability for the repeat violent offenders and the people actually pulling the triggers with the guns over and over again. They don't shoot themselves, and we've got soft on crime policies where we're just letting particularly juvenile offenders just out on the streets.
Yeah. Let me ask you about immigration. America has historically been welcoming of immigrants, and yet some feel we've lost control of our borders. How do we make good on our historical welcoming of immigrants, and at the same time provide security for our citizens and border security?
Well, that's what I was sort of talking about earlier. Maybe it didn't get into that part as well, but yeah, America is the greatest nation on earth, and people all around the world have always yearned to come to America for the American dream. And we're all descendants of immigrants to this country. My wife is a first generation immigrant who immigrated from South Korea and had to work to get her citizenship and her right to participate and vote in America and things like that. And we still want to be that welcoming nation. I was talking earlier, there are people we're trying to get in the country because we desperately need them and their expertise and whatever particular
Right.
skills, and we can't get them in because 15 million other people snuck in across the south border. And I can't paint a broad brush, but many of them were not people we were trying to recruit because they had, you know, criminal backgrounds. They were doing human trafficking. They were bringing in fentanyl. There was Venezuelan gangs and people from all over the world that, bad actors were coming across the border because it's like leaving your back door wide open. I mean, we want to welcome our guests at the front door, but we don't want to let everybody sneak in the back.
Got it. Obviously, since Roe v. Wade's been overturned, the reproductive health has remained a hot button issue in this election. And in Maryland, and we have a ballot question that would enshrine reproductive freedom in the state's constitution. You've come under attack in commercials. You've come under attack about your position. What is your position on reproductive freedom?
Well, I have said that I will be a co-sponsor of restoring Roe so that in every state in the nation, no one can come between a woman and her doctor. It's I said in 2019 that Roe was the correct decision, and I criticized the Supreme Court when they overthrew the decision. I've been against the national abortion ban on the record since I ran for Congress in 1992. So 32 years, I've said I would not outlaw abortion. When I ran for governor in 2014, I promised to protect access to abortion, and I kept that promise for 8 years. We had no changes to Maryland laws. We're now enshrining the laws that I stood up and protected for 8 years. And what's going on in this election, exactly the same. Did nothing to roll back any kind of a protection. And I think our state is at the top of the list in the country about where women have the most freedom. And we're going to continue to fight to make sure that they continue to have the right, not just in Maryland, but in every state in the country.
I remember when you and I sat down for lunch when we first met, and you were running for governor the first time. And I did ask you about that, and you said, no, you did tell me I have no intention on working on the issue of abortion. I was mostly going to focus on fiscal
Yeah.
issues. I remember that clearly. Since January 6th, which was an insurrection, there's been a fear across our nation that democracy is under assault for a variety of reasons: polarization, sort of politics getting out of control, hatred in the air, concerned about voting. What steps would you take as a United States Senator to help protect America's democracy?
Well, a lot of people talk about democracy, defending democracy, but I've actually done it. And I was the most outspoken person in my party back immediately after the election, when Trump refused to accept the results of the election. I was pushing him. I think, the first statewide elected Republican to congratulate Joe Biden and to say that the election is over and to call on Trump to concede and to, start a peaceful transition of power. On January 6th, when our democracy was under assault, the leaders of Congress were desperately calling me as the next door governor for help because they weren't getting any help. And the Capitol Police were overrun and the Capitol was under assault. And I sent the Maryland State Police and the Maryland National Guard, who were the first to arrive, to defend democracy. And I then the next day called on Donald Trump to resign and to allow Mike Pence to finish out a peaceful transition of power. So there's going to be no question where I'm going to stand if I have the right to be in the Senate. I'm going to stand up for the rule of law, for protecting our democracy, and for making sure that we have the winner of the election, whoever that is, that we go about it in a peaceful and lawful way.
One of the things you mentioned earlier, and that a lot of people ask us about, is the cost of housing, whether it's renting an apartment or buying a home, is becoming increasingly unaffordable. Interest rates for homes are still very high. How do we address this issue, Governor?
Well, I think the Fed has to get to work on getting interest rates lower, and we've got to make housing more affordable. We tripled the amount of affordable housing in Maryland while I was governor, and a big part of the problem, the cost of housing, about 40% of it is regulation. So we cut I think 3,000 job killing regulations. Some of the costs at the local, state, and federal level, mostly the federal level, is driving up the cost of new construction. We don't have enough of it, so there's not enough of a supply, and the interest rates are too high. So we've got a bad combination of high prices and high interest rates. So people can't afford that monthly payment to get a house, and it's something we got to address from all directions. We got to get the economy under control. We got to get interest rates down, and we've got to cut regulations, and we've got to stimulate more construction of affordable and kind of workforce housing to get people that we have a problem where people that are working in Montgomery County, for example, that may be teachers or police officers or firefighters, and they can't afford to buy a home in Montgomery County. And we've got to find a way to address that issue.
So research recently shows that climate change it has been impacting the frequency and duration of intensity of weather incidents. We had Hurricane Helene and Milton, dozens of people killed, communities devastated. What role would you take in the issue of climate change?
Yeah, well, we've taken a lot of already, but first of all, let me say to the people that are going through this terrible, tragedy down in Florida and throughout kind of the Appalachian states. I was former chairman of the Appalachian Regional Commission and chairman of the Chesapeake Bay Regional Commission. So, but though I've seen the impact is just devastating to those communities. And first order of business, we've got to get those people the basic needs back. We've got to, people don't have food and water, they don't have access, roads are out, transportation. We got to make sure they have the ability to vote in an election when many of the voting places are gone and they can't get to places. So there's an immediate need. But long term, climate change is a serious issue. Obviously, these two recent storms are the latest indication of it. But again, I have the best record of any Republican in America, and one of the best records of any governor in America. And that we had tougher, cleaner air standards than 48 other states. It became that way while I was governor. When Donald Trump pulled out of the Paris Accord, I put Maryland back in. We have a group called a thing called RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which I joined while I was governor and encouraged several of our other states in the region to join. We took every action possible to get greenhouse gas emissions under control. So we had cleaner air standards, twice as tough as the Paris Accord. We had clean water standards. We invested $4 billion in cleaning up the Chesapeake Bay, which is the cleanest it's been in a generation. The first governor to ever fully fund program open space and to fully fund the Chesapeake Bay restoration funds. And so the environment is a critical issue. And sometimes there are some people in my party that don't take it as seriously as I do. But I've got a record I would stack up against any Republican or Democrat in America.
If you win this race, how would you work with Senator Van Hollen?
Well, I've worked with Senator Van Hollen the whole time that I was governor, and we had a pretty decent relationship in that we were kind of Team Maryland. We were working on things like trying to attract businesses or trying to address an issue that was, had a state involvement and a federal involvement. I can tell you that I'm really perplexed and concerned that Senator Van Hollen, who I respected and worked with, why he has become so hostile. He's, I believe, the most anti-Israel member of the entire Senate, he and Bernie Sanders. So we have a completely different position on that issue. But, I was governor through 3 presidents, and I worked with President Obama, with Trump, and with Biden. And I'll try my best to work with Senator Van Hollen as a fellow senator. But I think on the position on defending Israel and supporting our greatest ally, I think, I have a completely different position than Chris Van Hollen and Angela Alsobrooks.
Do you support the United States deploying the THAAD anti-missile system and 100 U.S. personnel to the region to defend
Yeah,
Israel?
I think it was great. I think we absolutely need to do that. I mean, obviously, the region is getting more and more dangerous, and I think it's going to escalate, and we want to try to do what we can to protect Israel, because I think shortly we're going to have quite a bit of incoming, and that missile system can help save a lot of lives.
Let me ask you, the broader question of the Middle East. Iran is the primary sponsor, financer of all of these groups, whether it's Hamas, Hezbollah, or the Houthis. We had a nuclear agreement, which President Trump pulled out of. What would be your policy towards Iran as senator?
Yeah, I think our policies toward Iran have been really complete failures. And I'm not sure Trump should have pulled out of the nuclear agreement. And I'm quite sure that the Biden administration should not have released all of the billions of dollars that they gave back to Iran to use to sponsor terror around the world and with their proxies to not only attack Israelis but also Americans. And I think we've got to take them more seriously. We've got to have a more determined policy, and I think both of them, kind of screwed it up. I think after the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, and then giving back all the money to Iran and not standing up to Putin, it put us in a weak position, and where our allies wonder whether they can still trust us or count on us, and our enemies wonder whether they should still fear us. And now we got, Iran and its proxies going crazy in the Middle East. We've got China threatening Taiwan, and we have Putin continuing to come into a peaceful nation and try to take it over with the situation in Iran. And I think it's because of our weak foreign policy, which, I would say I have criticisms of both the Trump administration and the Biden administration.
Let me ask you, if you were to be elected to the Senate, there's a strong likelihood you'd be voting on a future Supreme Court justice. And what used to be many years ago, where there was a filibuster, you had to get 60, and it goes back 20, 30 years where it's obviously become politicized. And that's one of the things that I think Maryland voters are most concerned about. And so my question is, what would be the attributes that you would be looking for in a Supreme Court justice?
Well, it's something that I'm concerned about as well. And I think if there's one place that we should not, that one thing that we should never politicize, it's the Supreme Court, which is supposed to be, a separate.
But aren't we beyond that already to a certain
No, we
extent?
have to fix it. So right now we have Democrats who will only vote for Democrats and try to pack the court. My opponent said the other day she wants to be able to pack the court and change the rules, which I don't think most people agree with. The Democrats will only vote for Democrats. Republicans will only vote for Republicans. They try to jam partisan judges through on both sides, and they're all fighting, and they want to change the rules to say you only need 51 votes to jam it through. That's what Angela Alsobrooks wants to do, and it's what Donald Trump wants to do. I don't think it is what we should do. While I probably have more experience in this than anybody in the Senate. I appointed more judges than any governor in Maryland history, 190 judges. I appointed 6 out of the 7 members of our Supreme Court. And I appointed 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans and 3 women and 2 African American women and two Jewish judges. And I received unanimous confirmation on every single one of them. Every Republican and every Democrat voted for them because we picked the most qualified judges that would follow the rule of law in a nonpartisan, unbiased way. Without trying to jam somebody through in a partisan way. And that's what we need. We set an example for what should happen in Washington, and I'll fight to try to make that happen. And I made a commitment that I will not vote if Kamala Harris sends through a qualified nominee that I believe is going to be a good judge based on all of the character and their background and their judicial temperament and experience, and I'll vote for that one. If Trump sends somebody that's not qualified, I'll vote against it. And I said I won't vote for any judge unless there is bipartisan buy-in, because I think that's exactly what the country needs.
One of the issues that we hear a lot about and that Americans need more than ever is mental health services. And we hear about the low rate of reinsurance reimbursement. We hear about the low rate of accessibility. We know that it's connected to a lot of other factors in people's lives and promoting family stability. Do you have any ideas about how to increase access to mental health care?
Well, it's a critically important issue, and one that I focused on and addressed as governor. We tore down the Baltimore City Jail and moved a couple of $100 million into mental health and to drug treatment programs, and trying to get people more access and trying to take it more seriously. And I think at the federal level, there's no easy answers. There's no magic solution how we're going to fix the mental health crisis in America. But providing better reimbursements and providing more access and putting more attention and more focus and more money into the issue of mental health is critically important. And it goes back to the other issues we're talking about on mental health. It's why I signed the red flag law to keep the guns out of the hands of people that had mental issues and concerns. It's why we put more money into drug treatment and more money into mental health counseling, and why we passed a bill lowering the cost of health insurance by 30% per year, which was a great bipartisan accomplishment that no other state did.
Please comment on the opioid addiction crisis in America.
Yeah, the opioid crisis, it's probably one of the most frustrating things. There's some real regrets and frustrations, but that one is the biggest one. When I first was elected, while I was running for governor the first time, 2014, I was just going from town to town all over every county in the state. And I would say with community folks, what's the number one issue that you're concerned about? And they said opioids, which kind of surprised me back in 2014. Nobody was talking about that. So when I became governor, it was my very first act to I was the first governor to declare a state of emergency on opioids. And I appointed Lieutenant Governor Boyd Rutherford as the chairman of that. And we came up with, I think, 30 or 40 recommendations from a wide task force that held hearings all around the state. And we implemented all of them. And we put tons of money into it. And our health department and all other agencies were focused on how do we stop this crisis. And we were one of the only places bending down the curve on opioids and had some success. It was still a huge problem. We were having success, and then COVID hit, which was a whole nother crisis we had to deal with. And I led the nation's governors during COVID, and I think we were given the best results for health and economic recovery of out of all 50 states. But when COVID hit, everything shot back up, more alcoholism, more mental health problems, more financial problems, but mostly it was more of an opioid problem. And the thing just continues to be a problem. I think fentanyl has made it way worse. It's much more deadly. And it's it's still running out of control. And it's one where we have to find a way to get the federal, state, and local governments and nonprofits and community organizations and families. Everybody's got to get on the same page. And that also goes back to securing the southern border, because that's where all of the fentanyl is coming from. And that's causing the crisis and killing people in communities all across America.
Final question, and then I'll give you a few minutes to just close. Governor, when Democrats are saying, I really like Governor Hogan as governor, I'm sure you've heard this question many times, I can't vote for him for senator. That's going to put he's moderate. I like him. He's been strong supporter of the Jewish community. I like him on foreign policy. I like him on this issue. But we just can't risk putting a Republican in the Senate and tipping the balance, because if many people say, God forbid, Trump were to become president, and I'm quoting, not everybody in the Jewish community, there are people in the Jewish community who do support Trump, but it's usually in that context. We need the Senate to be a brake on potential nominees to the court, and we just can't afford in a deep blue state like Maryland to have a Republican governor. What is your answer to that question?
Well, I hear that all the time. I mean, that is an issue. We're currently pulling 26% of all the Harris voters in the state, and we need to get about 30. So we got to convince a few more Democrats that I'm not going to be the end of the world. Look, I'm not going to be the one that flips the Senate, but I will be the most outspoken voice, the most bipartisan, most common sense person that has already a proven ability to stand up to Donald Trump, and I'll stand up to whoever the president is, and to either party when I think they're wrong, and I'll always stand up for Marylanders, all Marylanders, and I think I can have a consequential role as a key voice to get people to come together. We have to have, regardless, it's going to be a divided Senate. We need people that are willing to work together, and that's exactly what I've done. But there's almost no chance of me. You look at any CNN or Washington Post or Politico or anything. Look at all the stats. I mean, it's very likely. I don't know who's going to be the president. I don't know who's going to be in charge of the House, but the Republicans will control the Senate. They're already won West Virginia and Montana, so they're at 51 right now. The Democrats have a tough map where they're defending 10 of their states. Most of them are red states or purple states. We're in the bluest state. But, I may be 52 or 53 or 54, but I'm not going to flip anything. But I think I can be the most important one there. And I think, the voters know me after 10 years. And they know that I'm willing to stand up to both parties. And I'm also willing to cross the aisle to make things happen. And I think we showed here in Annapolis exactly what needs to happen in Washington.
Thank you, Governor. Closing a few minutes to make your final appeal to those of us, the nice crowd on the line, and there's also about 6 or 7 media outlets on this line. Closing argument as long as you want.
Well, I just want to thank you all for joining on the Zoom today. And Ron, I want to thank you and the JCRC for giving us this opportunity. I've spent a lot of this campaign uh, trying to reach the Jewish community all across the state. And I know sometimes you guys don't always talk to the Baltimore area guys, but I'm talking to both. I'm trying to bring everybody together.
We like the Baltimore community.
So we've
We're all
spent a lot of
brothers.
time at every organization and with multiple synagogues and community organizations, and because I think it's critically important that we do have somebody in the Senate that stands up for Israel, and that's exactly what I'll do. But my closing, I understand a lot of folks on here are Democrats. They might have some concern. I can just assure you that I'm going to be the exact same kind of strong, independent leader that I've always been, and that I'm not running for the Senate to try to help Republicans or to flip anything over. I'm going there because I'm completely fed up and disgusted with politics, and I think we desperately need leaders who are willing to stand up for what's right and stand up to either side. And you know that I won't ever be a rubber stamp for anyone. I've proven time and time again that I'm going to be an independent voice who will stand up and do what's right for Maryland and for the country.
On that,
So,
I'm sorry.
so I'll just say, I'm trying to put people over politics and country over party, and I'm asking all of you to consider doing the same thing.
Governor, thank you for that. Governor, thank you for your warm friendship with Maryland's Jewish community and for taking the time to join us. We also appreciate our questions, which were inspired and written by our audience. A quick editorial note: this Sunday at Sha'arei Torah in Gaithersburg, beginning at 10 a.m., we're going to be hosting a town hall meeting with Democrat April Delaney and Republican Neil Parrott, who are running to represent Maryland's 6th congressional district. And you have to go to our website, jcouncil.org, to register. Please remember you can vote by mail. You can drop off your ballot at a county site. You can early vote in person from October 24th through 31st or on Election Day, Tuesday, November 5th. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.